Hey guys, Tuesday here. It seems impossible that spring break is already over and our second week of remote learning is happening, but here we are. We are going to proceed as usual. The idea for this week is that I will be uploading your assignments starting at 8 in the morning. You'll get a chance to look at them, work on them throughout the day. And then at 12:30, if you have questions, if you want to work through the assignment together, I'll be on Zoom, this specific channel around, this channel that I put in your announcement around 12:30. And then we will talk, we'll discuss what the week looks like, etc. So this week we're going to continue on with the Harlem Renaissance. And today we're going to be looking at two poems. By Claude McKay, one of the Harlem Renaissance poets. And so I'm going to share my screen right now, and we're going to go through a PowerPoint together, of which you should be able to use and look at as you are doing your assignment. And so Claude McKay is where we're going to begin today. Excuse me, I need to, from current slide. This here is Claude McKay, and you guys have a document that talks about him and the poems that we're going to be going over. So if you haven't gotten that out, you should do so. The questions on there are going to coincide with this PowerPoint, and we'll go through some of these specific questions together. And then, as I said, at 12:30, if you have questions, you can log on to Zoom. I'll be there. The only difference actually between this week and the week before is that I am going to require you to check in at least once this week. I know some of you guys have been logging into Zoom each day, and that is completely still appropriate, but I am going to ask that at one point this week, every one of you checks in with me. I will give you a few participation points for doing that, so it is an assignment, and you can check in with me in multiple different ways. The first of which is entering those Zoom meetings. You can check in that way. You could text me and say, hey, this is what I've been working on. This is what I'm doing. I don't have any questions, but give me some pointers in regards to what's going on and how you want me to change things. And those are the two options for you. So text or logging into Zoom. I actually encourage you to log into Zoom because it will be fun, and it's a time for us to just sit and talk and hang out and see if you guys have any questions. So Claude McKay is who we're talking about. And so you guys have established some historical context already. Actually, let me, I messed up here. Give me 1 second. I want to go to this. I need to unhide this. This is the one I want to hide. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go from this current slide and do a quick review about things that we learned both the week before spring break and what you should know for an upcoming assessment. So the idea here is that you should be able to know what the Harlem Renaissance is, a rebirth and growth of learning within the Black community, specifically in Harlem, New York. You should be able to explain the significance of the Talented 10. This is the group of African Americans that got together, the ones that were in the 10 percentile, that had gone to college, that were affluent, meaning they had money, and they got together to establish Black culture and what that looked like in this time period. You should know what the Great Migration is, which is the movement of Southern Blacks to the North, specifically to territories, or excuse me, cities within the North. You should know why Harlem was the epicenter of this Renaissance, which is like outside of New York City. It is the place where they went, and it specifically became an African-American community. And then you should be able to know and explain Cullen's use of illusion in his poem, Yet Do I Marvel. Allusion meaning the reference to older texts. This is where we went into the Greek, I think Tantalus and those other stories that we talked about a little bit before spring break. You should also remember that the Harlem Renaissance is in and around the 1920s, the same time period as the Great Gatsby is happening, and so this is happening simultaneously pre the Great Depression. So with that information, Claude McKay is where we're going to head in our discussion today. And so racial tension is on the rise in America. I'm going to move myself. I don't know if you guys can see me do that. But racial tension between Blacks and whites were at an all-time high in 1919. This is pre-1920s, but post-World War I. World War I, African Americans came back from World War I having been shot at and killed, much like their white counterparts within the war and within their like barracks. And so they came back expecting America to be different, segregation to be less, and their place in society to be changed. That was not the case. And so racial tensions between blacks and whites are at an all-time high in 1919. And then a riot breaks out in Chicago and outside of Chicago on Lake Michigan. There was designated places for blacks and whites to swim, and there was a group of African Americans swimming in Lake Michigan, and they drifted over to the wrong side of where they were supposed to be, and in doing so created some tension. Some white swimmers were on the beach. They did not appreciate what was happening, and they started throwing rocks at those African Americans out swimming, and a riot broke out. 38 dead, over 300 injured, and that was the beginning of that. So that wasn't like the overall riot. The riot then spread out into the rest of the summer into other cities as this incident in Chicago happened. So McKay, the author of the poems that we're going to be reading today, was on a railroad car dining there when an African-American worker was talking about and was worried about being attacked. And so McKay wrote these poems in and amongst this tension as he's watching how people are reacting and the fear that is being induced with these riots happening in America. So he himself was not American born. He was born in Jamaica. He was born and raised in Jamaica, came to the U.S. when he was in his early 20s, and was in shock. Shocked because of a lot of things, but mostly because of how African Americans were treated here. Racial discrimination, the outward prejudice, and an obvious racism that was happening was fascinatingly shocking to him. So he began writing in hopes to give African Americans a voice, to instill pride within this group of people that were subject to so many horrible things. And then throughout his life, he lived in both Europe, like many writers did at this time, and then returned to Africa for a time in his life too, during the 1920s, to gain access to his African culture as well. So Claude McKay, Jamaican-born American, living in Harlem, writing to African Americans, and then establishing himself as one of these Harlem Renaissance writers. And so the first poem that we're going to look at today, and this brings us into your worksheet. If you haven't opened that yet, this is the time to do that. The first few questions on the worksheet are in regards to the last slides that we just went on. So numbers 1 and 2 go back to the beginning part of this slideshow, and numbers 3 through 7, as you guys can see here, are established within this text or within this slide. So I'm going to read the poem and then reference some of these questions as we go. If in fact you're looking at the questions, number 3 says explain the metaphor in the first 2 lines. So we're looking at these first 2 lines here for number 3. Although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, stealing my breath of life, I will confess I love this cultured hell that tests my youth. Her vigor flows like tides into my blood, giving me strength erect against her hate. Her bigness sweeps my being like a flood. Yet as a rebel fronts a king in state, I stand within her walls with not a shred of terror, malice, nor a word of jeer. Darkly, I gaze into the days ahead and see her might and granite wonders there, beneath the touch of time's unerring hand, like priceless treasures sinking in the sand. So this is Claude McKay's Ode to America. And so the title of this establishes for us who the she is throughout. And so right here, he does not give this pronoun a name, but we are to understand that who the she is America because of the title. So America, although she feeds me bread of bitterness. So the metaphor is that America is alive and well, and she is a person, but that is not necessarily the case. And she is feeding him bread of bitterness and sinking into my throat her tiger's tooth. So America and the bread of bitterness and the throat of her tiger tooth is this first question, and you are to explain what that metaphor is. A metaphor, for those of you that are remembering right now, is a comparison without using the word like or as. So the question here is, what are the two things that are being compared? What is America being compared to? Number 4 here is, how does the oxymoron in line 4 demonstrate the reasons McKay loves America? An oxymoron is a word or phrase that establishes a contradiction. They contradict each other. And so you are looking for that contradiction in line 4. Number 5 brings us into an opinion question where you are explaining lines 5 and 6 in detail. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these 2 lines you are explaining in detail. And then 6, you are going to talk about the speaker. The speaker is, in fact, most likely an African American. We don't know it to be Claude McKay specifically, but my question here is, what does the speaker refuse to return? Why, excuse me, do they refuse to return violence? And what treasures sink in the sand are the questions I'm looking for here. And so he talks about treasures sinking in the sand. What are those treasures that he's talking about in this poem? So the next one we're going to read, and the questions will come after we read it, but you can see them on your sheet there, is the question, if we must die. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for her their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back. So this right here, as you guys can see, is a sonnet. I know some of you guys have studied sonnets before, either in Brit Lit or in other classes, but we have a rhyme scheme of hogs, dogs, spot, lot, die, defy, shed, dead, foe, blow, etc. So this is a Shakespearean sonnet in its rhyme scheme as well as in its tempo. And so the questions that we have here is, what is he trying to say here? Sonnets, by their definition, are trying to answer a question. And so the issue is proposed in the first few lines, and then the last few lines of the poem answer the question for us. And so we're going to be demonstrating our understanding of what Claude McKay is trying to establish in this poem. And so the first question asks us, according to McKay, what should African Americans not do in the face of race discrimination? And then also, in what ways could a person gain their enemy's respect? In what ways could we establish respect? So for this poem specifically, just 2 questions. And then the last 2 questions encompass both thematic poems. And so the last 2 questions establish what topics are explored in both poems and what does McKay reveal about these topics? What insight into life is he providing here? And so as you're studying just 2 of his poems, my question for you is, what is the overarching idea or theme or message that we are supposed to establish for ourselves in these 2 poems? And so some of the themes that I want you guys to be thinking about as you're going to then, after the worksheet, move into a discussion where you're going to be talking to each other, is what topics are explored in his poems. And so the first question, pride, courage, dignity, and passion, are some of the ones that I've come up with. Some of the themes is obviously living in America and what that's like for this group of people. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. And then also, as you have something precious and beautiful, are you supposed to let that go if it doesn't want to be held on to? And so do we tighten the grip on it, as it's saying in here, or do we say, you know what? This isn't what you want, so I'll let you go. And so in If We Must Die, it is this idea that yes, we are oppressed, but we are never to give up. We are never to just let it happen. We fight. We are entitled to fight. And that is just one possibility of some themes. So for today, just a recap of my expectation, you have read through these poems, you've gone through an established meaning by answering these questions, and then the second part of this is to move over into the discussion portion and then answer the discussion question for today as well. You are going to write your response to the questions, and after you're done with that, you are going to respond to at least 2 people in class and add to their thoughts or disagree with them, etc. So with that said, I'm going to cut this presentation off now and let you guys go get to work. Again, if you have questions, I'll be on at 12:30 today to answer them for you. And yeah, we'll talk to you then if you have questions. So I'm going to stop share this and say goodbye for now.